Thank you very much, Lance. Thanks you all for being here. So what I'm going to try to do today is I'm going to see, this is very rough and tentative, but I'm going to see if I can integrate general semantics, particularly Korzybski's general semantics, into the contemporary theory known in physics as assembly theory. I don't know how many people are familiar with assembly theory. It is somewhat, we'll call it a cutting edge, controversial theory. It's, I think in some way it holds an amazing amount of promise, but it's still in a very young and heuristic stage. Simply stated, before I go too far ahead, is that assembly theory it's attempting to, it comes from physics and astrophysics, and it's attempting to provide an operative vocabulary that spans physics, chemistry, biology, human evolution, and the creation of technological artifacts. And it's giving like a common language for all of this. So in some way, it's a formidable task that they've set to themselves. I also think it's very important for those of us who are not physicists to be able to meet them somewhat on their terms. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to start with the last part of my presentation on the structural differential. Then I'm going to go into this discussion of temporal structure, and then I'll finally move on to the discussion of non-elementalism. Ultimately, what I'm trying to do is somewhat clarify general semantics by bringing it into dialogue with assembly theory, seeing if I can identify some points of connection and mutual edification, and ultimately I'm hoping to add to some of our own self-understanding to the extent that we can do that. So let me just start then, as I say, with the structural differential. So structural differential, this is, I guess people here are familiar with this. There's one hanging on the wall over there. I think you can purchase one if you'd like to get one. They're in vinyl. But this was his famous, it was patented tool, also early on known as the anthropometer. But these are the images from both Science Insanity and from Wikipedia. And he's doing a lot of things when he is in this chapter from Science Insanity called the structural differential. And I even have a prop up here I'm going to show here. So he's doing, as I say, he's doing a lot of things in this chapter. I think the two most important things he's doing is he's trying to give people a practical, usable tool for training in consciousness of abstracting. That's what he's up to, right? And on the other hand, he's trying to show the difference between human cognition or human forms of experience and knowing and animal forms of experience and knowing. Now, the two examples that he uses throughout that chapter are pencil and apple. And I have a real apple here. I thought I would bring that just, everyone can see that I'm holding an apple, right? You presume that what I'm holding is an apple. We can just, I'll hide it. I'll maybe bring it back out. So what Korzybski's doing with the apple here is he's sort of saying, and this is, the horizontal difference here, this is the object that the animal perceives over here. And he uses the word Fido. He's basically saying when Fido encounters either a pencil or an apple, it just sees what it's abstracted from its nervous system. Note, for Korzybski, this is already a map. This is a map. This is not the territory. I think sometimes when we're talking about what Korzybski's meaning, no, our nervous system abstracts out those objects that we experience. And so when he says the map is not the territory, or even better, the word is not the thing, he's trying to say, yeah, the word is not the object, but the object isn't the event level either. That is, there's multiple levels of abstracting going on, and the animal, as he says, is unaware of that. The animal simply perceives the object as it is right there within its spatial temporal embodiment. Like, here it is. We see the object. Now, for the human, so says Korzybski, there's a double folding over of this object. On one hand, I can make a statement about it. I can say it's an apple. I can say it's round. I can say it's reddish. I might say it comes from trees. I could say that trees require water. And in some way, I keep making statements about my statements, and they feed back to that sense of what it is behind or underneath or within the apple at subatomic level. So in one hand, we have, again, the object that the animal sees. We have the object that we see we not only can label that object at multiple levels of abstraction, we're aware that that object is not simply limited to our sense capacities. We're aware that it's sub-microscopic processes, whirling dance of electrons, arguably quantum foam, depending on how far we want to go down there. And I think, again, the important point here is that Korzybski is trying to train people in the consciousness of abstracting. He's trying to point out this difference between animal experience and human experience. And he's trying to get us to realize that those everyday items that we have, we attend to certain characteristics and we disattend to other characteristics. So when I'm attending to the apple, I may attend to its smell, to its weight, to its color, but it has all kinds of other characteristics. And the fact that, there's some of the strings attached to the objects from the event level, but there's also some strings that are not attached to the object. And let's see if I can get to that in just 1 second as I move on to this discussion about assembly theory. So assembly theory, really, it does some very interesting stuff as far as making connections to Korzybski's ideas. The book that I can strongly recommend enough is this book called Life as No One Knows It by Sarah Amari Walker. It just came out this year, fairly recently, and she's popularizing, she's one of the original formulators, but popularizing some of the key concepts of assembly theory. And I'll start with just this basic notion of assembly theory is that rather than going from the object level to the event level in the way Korzybski does, what assembly theory does is says, well, what about the actual temporal constitutions of the objects themselves? That is, what are the computational steps that were required to bring that object into existence? Now, I say that because in assembly theory, they not only are able to give assembly indexes for things like pencils and apples, but they're even able to do it for things like words, like the word pencil and apple. So just for simplicity's sake, I think we all are going to agree that apples are much older than pencils. They have this long lineage, the evolutionary history. For assembly theory, a pencil actually has a higher index than an apple does. Because in order to understand how a pencil would come into being, you not only have to have evolutionary process, you have to have evolutionary process that could make a way for an organism as complicated as a human, and that human could then, through cultural evolution, learn to become literate, and then from literacy could create something like a pencil. There's a concatenated imbrication of a thickness in the objects themselves. In assembly theory, it's basically called a hyperobject. All objects are hyperobjects. A hyperobject means an object is a lineage. A different way to say that is every one of us here in the room, you're basically a 3.8 billion year old self-propagating information system. You're a temporal structure. And when I say that you're a 3.8 billion year old temporal structure, think about it. You were just born into a body that had 3.8 billion years worth of survival value in it, right? And try to sort of register that for a second, right? And what is that structure? Well, the structure is a function, and the function is to bind chemistry, to bind space, and to bind time. That's what that structure is doing, right? Now, I think we're probably all aware of the metaphysical question, sort of classic for metaphysicians and for physicists. They'll say, why is there something rather than nothing? Why is there something rather than nothing? Assembly theorists, what they like to say is, why is there something rather than everything? And again, when you ask it that way, they sort of say, well, the reason there can't be everything is that not all things come into existence in the same way. Some require very extensive indices of concatenated processes that would make them possible. And again, I think that's very true for something like us. A different way to say it is that when you're talking about the question of why is there something rather than nothing, you're kind of asking questions that are largely answered by the metaphysicians and the physicists. And they'll give you a formula. When you ask why is there something rather than everything, now we're talking about information and life. We're talking about the kind of processes that are involved in selection, again, and evolution. Now, I'm trying to be mindful of my time here. I guess I have, about 5 minutes left here. Again, so not only are we ancient beings who in our function are binding chemistry and space and time, and it's important to recognize ourselves as uniquely time binding, but it's also important to not forget that we're life, that we're space binders too. We're chemistry binders too. And I think it's that kind of non-elementalism which is really crucial. Now, if you remember, Korzybski's notion of non-elementalism is to not treat things as separate because we can sort of imagine them that way. A lot of, for Korzybski, was stuff like space and time, and he saw that, Einstein and revolution was to see them as two aspects of the same thing. We could do this energy and matter. We could do it with mind and body. There are different ways in which we try to deal with non-elementalistic orientations. But I guess in some way, I would suggest for people that this really is like the main error that almost all of us fall into. And it's in a very profound way, that we sort of think something like reality's out there, over there, and I'm over here. Or the world is something and I'm something else. Or that there's a kind of ontological division between me and reality. It's like we forget that each and every one of us has come into the world by coming out of another person. That is, you didn't really come in, you've come out. And there's this long chain of being of each of us sort of circling out. And it's this perpetuating system that's in process that we really want to keep our eye on. Again, these temporally elongated temporal structures, right? That they're very thick. Now, the corrective response, the way to sort of advocate for a non-elementalism is to say, yeah, we didn't come into the world, right? We've come out of it, right? We're something that reality is doing. We're inseparable from environmental processes or reality. Now, I think the way that I would try to maybe wrap this up a little bit is to say, I think we're all very concerned here as general semanticists, as communication theorists, as media ecologists, about a more sane world, a more equitable world, about doing our part, about trying to be a good human being in small ways and large ways. And I do think it's important. Every person should feel the obligation to make a great contribution to the world and to everyone around you. But that said, I think what people really need is a deep down radical change in their self-understanding. And when I say that, I'm trying to say this to you, that no matter what you will ever achieve in your life, no matter how great and noble it is, it won't nearly rival what you already are in your being. That is, you are more than you will ever accomplish by anything that you could do. Okay, thank you.